welcome to everybody for joining the Radical Anthropology session. This is the second of Chris's series of 3 on the grammar of world mythology. Before I say something about this, I just want to make an announcement which is relevant for people who are anywhere close to London, not so relevant for people who are international. We will be carrying on the Zoom, so you're absolutely welcome to stay with us. We hope you will. But we're hoping, well, we're definitely going back to our class, our home at UCL Anthropology Department next Tuesday evening. So we will run the Zoom from UCL. So anyone who can get to Central London would like to come to that class. Chris is going to do the 3rd of his sessions there at UCL. So I hope we'll have quite a few in the audience. It may be a small audience to start off with, but that's better, fewer but better. That's fine. So tonight, after last week's discussion on the trickster and the waxing and waning logic of the trickster and all the contradictions, we're going to focus on what's been termed by Lévi-Strauss the bird nester, with Chris using examples across continents from a number of continents, including specifically very homegrown example, Jack-and-the-Beanstalk. So I'm not sure I need to say very more, but this is again, it's using mythology and trying to understand the message intrinsic to mythology, may be telling us answers to the question that Graeber and Wengrow raised in The Dawn of Everything, stuck. So once again, these myths are pursuing the problem of getting stuck. Chris.
On May the 20th, 1964, 2 American radio astronomers, Robert Wilson and Arno Penzias, were kind of fiddling around with a huge big horseshoe-shaped receiver, having put a satellite up in the sky, and they were listening to see whether they could get a message sent out, bounced on that satellite over from Japan. And before the people in Japan had even switched the signal on, these 2 were very puzzled because they kept hearing this strange sort of humming, deep humming sound in their instruments, and they wondered what on earth it could be. And they thought it might be the electrical properties of the pigeon droppings in the great big bowl that they were using, and they cleaned it out and they switched it back on again, and they heard this sound. And it turned out that they were hearing kind of the echo of the Big Bang with which the whole universe began. They discovered cosmic microwave background radiation, this ancient light that started saturating the whole universe 380,000 years after its creation. And the only reason I'm mentioning all that is because this extraordinary 4-volume work, Mythology, the culminating work of Claude Lévi-Strauss, if Lévi-Strauss is correct, when we hear these myths from around the world, we are hearing another echo of something which happened in the distant past, because Lévi-Strauss suggests that what we're hearing in so many different voices, so many different anonymous collectivist voices from all around the world, is a kind of echo of the moment when human symbolic culture emerged. We're hearing an echo of that extraordinary transition from nature to culture, to use the language of Lévi-Strauss. If he's right, that is absolutely amazing. And I think he is right. I mean, he did sort of have 2 theories. One is that the reason for this strangely consistent underlying logic of all the world's myths, he suggested, is perhaps the actual genetic architecture of the human brain or the human mind. He's tended to confuse brain and mind. But then his other alternative was not so much the sort of genetic architecture of the brain or the mind, but was actually a kind of reflection of what happened at the very beginning when symbolic culture, this strange domain that we humans inhabit, first got off the ground. I'm going to start by trying to simplify Lévi-Strauss's conclusions. We've done it in the last lecture. I'm going to try and do it perhaps even more simply. So, and I suppose I'm addressing this question: is there a simple way of saying what Lévi-Strauss's conclusion was? And I think there is. It's that all the world's magical myths and fairy tales, and that word magical is quite important. We're not talking about novels, we're not talking about just descriptions of something that happened the other day. There's something magical about these stories. That they all involve a starting point in the world we're familiar with, if you like, the real world, the world that we can feel and see and taste and experience with the senses. And then what happens is that there's a flow of blood, or something which you can fairly clearly see is a kind of euphemism for a flow of blood. And this flow of blood signifies death. So what happens is that you're switched from this world to the other world, the land of the dead. And that's not magic, it's just that you were alive and now you're dead. And then comes the magic bit, which is you come back from the dead. And this is a cyclical logic. Life is followed by death, followed by life, followed by death, followed by life, followed by death. You move between this world and the other world. And one of the implications of this is, of course, that death is just a phase. Death isn't permanent. You don't stay dead. You come alive again, and then you die again and become alive again. And in all the world's myths, the model for that death and resurrection is the moon. And linked to the moon, of course, again, in all the world's languages and cultures and traditions, is the moon change. Woman's biggest husband being that very same moon. So menstruation, there's a flow of blood, you kind of die in the sense that you move away from everyday life, away from cooking and marital sex and housework and all that stuff. You go into the other world, the world of seclusion, but it's only a temporary death, and you come back from that temporary death with the moon, of course. That's a kind of cyclical way of describing the world's myths, the underlying grammar of world mythology, which is the title of these talks. Additionally, there's very often, when the myths are at all lengthy and extended, and kind of when they have a kind of moral lesson at the end of them, there's a linear way of putting it. And the linear way is to say you're alive, you die, you come alive, you die, you come alive, you die. You're constantly moving between life and death, this world and the other, heaven and earth. And then something happens, something kind of terrible, because the connection between sky and earth is severed. The rope is cut, the cord is broken, the string is cut. The beanstalk in the story we're going to be looking at in a moment, in Jack-and-the-Beanstalk, Jack ends the story by chopping down the beanstalk. So he was going up and down, up and down, up and down between life and death, heaven and earth, and then he chops the beanstalk, and the giant comes crashing down, and that's the end of that. Since when we have all been stuck, because if the connection between heaven and earth is broken and you can't keep popping up and down, what that means is that if you're alive, you're stuck here. But as soon as you die, you're going to be stuck in the other world. And there's a kind of reason why all the world's myths, when they have a kind of moral, when they have a kind of beginning, a middle, and an end, they take that form. Now, one of the things we're doing here in these talks is responding to David Graeber and David Wengrow's amazing, extraordinary, in many ways, wonderful book, The Dawn of Everything. And one of the things it led me to look at was an article by David Graeber, published in 2011, about divine kingship of the Shilluk. And it just so happens that in that essay of his, we have a Dinka version of the myth I've just described, and it's nice and short. The Dinka, of course, people along the Nile, the southern parts of the Nile, cattle herders. And the story is this: in the beginning, the sky lay just above the earth, connected by a rope, so you could freely climb up and down. But one day, a woman who was pounding millet raised the long handle of her hoe and accidentally bumped the sky and annoyed God up there. So God drew back in anger, and he sent a bird, a little blue bird, the color of the sky, to cut the rope between earth and sky. And since then, men and women have suffered sickness, and death has been a permanent state. And Graeber's comment on this story is, I'll just read it out. He simply says, it doesn't take a lot of imagination to see these stories as first and foremost metaphors of birth, the loss of the blissful dependency on the womb, which the cutting of the cord makes unusually explicit. And David kind of leaves it there. So this is, it's quite compelling, I think, that originally we were in the womb, everything was done for us, we didn't have to work, no suffering really, we're just in the womb, nice and warm, mothers looking after us. And then we come out of the womb, and the midwife cuts the umbilical cord. And ever since then, we've felt this terrible loss of union with our mother, which is kind of, okay, a kind of sort of, I suppose, Jungian or Freudian idea, because of course, all humans everywhere have the experience of being once in the womb and then coming out and being a bit separated, I suppose, afterwards. But of course, there's that kind of explanation, I don't really think cuts it. There's so many things about the stories which that doesn't. I mean, this particular Dinka story is quite nice because we don't have a particular idea about going up and down, except the starting point, which is that in the beginning, the sky lay just above the earth, connected by a rope, so that people would freely climb in and out, up and down, up and down. And I can't quite see how, when we were inside our mother's womb, we were going in and out all the time. We weren't going in and out, this world and the other world. We were kind of just there, and then we came out, and the cord was cut. And it's that periodicity, that cyclicity, which to me, at any rate, means we have to go a little bit beyond just the idea of being born, and that's it, into something, a different kind of connection with the womb. And I think the connection with the womb was the connection with, if you like, collective childcare, a more collective womb, a bunch of mothers, and particularly a bunch of mothers when they were in solidarity with each other through their blood, and that in connection with the moon. That to me makes much more sense, because that's something which can happen. You can have women in real solidarity, synchronizing their periods with each other, and therefore being a kind of joint mother, more than just a biological mother. But on the other hand, also, you can perfectly well have, and many cultures do have, the same experience basically of birth, but without that collectivity. So we're getting a more specific interpretation of the Dinka story. Right, now what I want to do is go to the story for this evening, and I think a good idea would be to just start with Jack-and-the-Beanstalk. And the reason I want to start with it, because I've got quite a lot of myths to get through, and I'm well aware that I can't. There's no way I can get through all the myths I kind of really want to get through, but I don't want to miss out on this one, Jack-and-the-Beanstalk. So, two versions, and the earliest known published version appeared in a little pamphlet published in London in 1734, and it was called The Story of Jack Spriggins and His Enchanted Bean. And it runs as follows: that though Jack was a smart, large boy, nevertheless, his grandmother and he laid together. And between whiles, the good old woman instructed Jack in many things. The woman said to her grandson, "Jack," says she, "as you are a comfortable bedfellow to me," I'm slightly emphasizing these things because there's some hanky-panky going on here between Jack and his grandmother. She says, "As you are a comfortable bedfellow to me, I must tell you that I have a bean in my house, which will make your fortune." But the grandmother dropped this bean from her purse, and it fell into the ashes of the hearth, where the cat found it, just as Jack was about to make the fire in the hearth place for his grandmother. So Jack finds the bean, shown to him by the cat. "Odds bud," cried Jack, "I'll set it in our garden and see what it will come to, for I always loved beans and bacon." And then, what was wonderful The bean was no sooner put into the ground, but the sprout of it jumped out of the earth and grew so quick that it gave Jack a fillip on the nose and made him bleed furiously. Jack ran to his grandmother, crying, "Save me, I am killed." So he's bleeding from the nose. He thinks he's been killed. He runs to his grandmother. His grandmother was cross because, of course, her bean had been stolen. So she tried to thrash him, but he climbed up the beanstalk, which was now a mile high, and escaped. Jack climbed higher and higher. Feeling hungry, he called at an inn on one of the beanstalk's leaves. Here he thought to rest for a time and go strutting like a crow in a gutter. "What have you to eat, landlord?" says he. "Everything in the world, sir," says the landlord. "Why then," says Jack, "give me a neck of mutton and broth." "Alas," says the landlord, "tomorrow is market day. How unfortunate it is. I cannot get you a neck of mutton tonight if it was to save my soul." "Well then, get me something else," says Jack. "Have you any veal?" "No, indeed, sir, not at present, but there is a fine calf fatting at Mr. Jenkinson's that will be killed on Saturday next. But have you any beef in your house?" says Jack. "Well, truly, sir," says the landlord, "if you had been here on Monday last, I believe, though I say it that I should not say it, you never saw so fine a sirloin of beef as we had, and plum pudding too, which the justice who dined here and their clerks and constables entirely demolished. And though I got nothing by them, yet their company was a credit to my house." "Zounds," says Jack, "have you nothing in the house? I'm hungry, I'm starving." Jack hears a cock crowing and demands that this be killed and broiled. The landlord refuses because the cock belongs to the squire. Jack asks for a hen to be killed, but all the hens are incubating eggs, which should hatch in a week. "Have you no eggs in the house?" asks Jack. "No, sir, indeed," answers landlord, "but jest eggs, which we make of chalk." "Why then," says Jack, "what the devil have you got?" "Why, to tell you the truth, sir, I don't know that I've anything in the house to eat." So now the narrator tells us that all this has been because Jack has been under the spell of his grandmother, who's preventing him from eating. But after an hour, the spell breaks, whereupon the grandmother changes into a monstrous toad who starts to crawl down into the cellar. So Jack now finds himself, he's in the presence of a kind of opposite kind of woman, a fair lady who is called Empress of the Mountains of the Moon. Now, this lovely woman used to be the grandmother's black cat. And the text explains that this beautiful woman is entirely at Jack's disposal, and that he now has the full power of possessing all the pleasures he could desire. So the couple go to bed and play their rantum scantum tricks until the next morning. Jack is so tired from his amorous exertions that he sleeps long in the morning, dreaming about killing the giant Gogmagog and rescuing several thousand young ladies from being crushed in the monster's jaws. So quite a male fantasy there. And I would agree with Graeber that now and again a bit of Freudianism doesn't do any harm. And we have these extremely tall, very thick, high beanstalk up which you can climb. Not too difficult to sort of interpret that. But remember the critical point that Jack, while this beanstalk is thrusting upwards, is a bedfellow of his grandmother. So this is a kind of strange kind of intimacy. It's not really marital sex. And just to use the terminology of Claude Lévi-Strauss in his mythology, you have two categories of relationships, really, two opposite categories. One's kinship and one's marriage. Marital sex is different from the kind of intimacy that kinship can involve. But if kinship intimacy is excessively intense, and in so many fairy tales, everything is taken to extreme, then of course this is intimacy within the blood. Intimacy within your own blood is the opposite of intimacy with different blood, with somebody who's not your relative, if you like. So clearly the first part of the story is about one kind of intimacy, and the second point is the exact opposite. So the grandmother is now replaced by the Empress of the Mountains of the Moon. That's a rather amazing version, which I was informed about by one of my students in the radical anthropology group many, many years ago, Max Pearson, who very sadly died several decades ago, but he taught me so much about fairy tales. And I'll just go briefly through the story, the version of the Jack-and-the-Beanstalk that probably you know a bit better, which is Jack, he sells his mother's cow for a few paltry beans, which the old woman, she's so furious that just got a few beans for a perfectly good cow, so he chucks them into the garden. Not having anything to eat, they both went supperless to bed. In the morning, Jack saw a huge beanstalk growing in the garden and climbed up it to the sky. Jack now found himself in a barren world. He concluded that he must now die with hunger. So in both these versions, we have hunger emphasized, but in the one I've just told you, the Jack Spriggins version, we have this comical, excessive, endlessly elaborated theme of no food in the inn. So he's famished. He arrived at a castle, and in the castle up in the sky, he's welcomed by a woman who agrees to hide him in the oven, where he won't be seen by the woman's husband, who's a giant and who only eats human flesh. So he's hiding in the oven. In comes the giant. Fee, fi, fo, fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman. So we still have the theme of blood. Jack is clearly raw flesh. He's kind of in the oven, but he certainly hasn't been cooked. And then he's Jack's safe, and having eaten his usual raw cannibalistic meal, the giant falls asleep. And now Jack comes out of the oven and takes advantage of the fact that the giant's asleep, and he seizes a magic hen which lays golden eggs. And then down climbs Jack to be back with his mother. So Jack was so excited by his adventures, and especially coming back with a hen who lays golden eggs, that he decided to go up again, but his mother wouldn't let him. And so what Jack does is he rises from bed very, very early before his mother's awake. And he covers his face with something which discolors him. So he does a kind of skin change, a disguise. And then unperceived by anyone, he climbed up the beanstalk. So when he gets to the beanstalk, he climbs up the top, he arrives at the castle, he's not recognized by the giant's wife, and events are repeated, this time with Jack stealing gold and silver in 2 bags. On the third occasion, it's Midsummer's Day. Jack disguises himself completely, goes to the castle, and this time escapes with the giant's magical harp. The harp cries out to warn the giant, who wakes up and chases the boy down the beanstalk, but just as Jack crashes down to the bottom, he takes an axe, chops down the stalk, and brings the giant crashing down to his death. And then Jack and his mother live in wealth and comfort to the end of the days, as you would expect, because you've got a hen that lays golden eggs, two bags of gold, and a harp which plays itself. So, but notice that there are now no more trips to the sky. The beanstalk is cut. Heaven and earth are now forever separated. We have got stuck. Right. The key myth of Claude Lévi-Strauss's mythology is myth M1, it's called. They go up to pretty much to 1,000, of course. It's the story of the macaw and its feathers, and it's basically the story of a bird nester. And I'm wondering whether I think I can afford to just read a little bit of it. Basically, the story is about a young man. He's the Bororo Indians, a group with matrilineal moieties in central Brazil. The story is called The Bird Nester, or the macaws and their nest. And a young man is coming of age. He should be initiated, and his mum is collecting the penis sheaths, the plants from which you make a penis sheath. And he has sex with his own mother. And his father is pretty suspicious. And when he lines up all the different boys who may have had sex with his wife, as we know, the boy's mother, he finds there's only one who's a bit in disarray around his groin. Pretty sure that it's his own son that's guilty. And I'm trying not to read it, so sort of save a bit of time. And so his father decides to punish him. And what he does is he says to his son, look, up there, right up here, there's a macaw's nest with lovely feathers. And these feathers, of course, are very much prized. So his father invites his son to come with him to collect these macaws nesting in the face of a cliff. And the grandmother of the boy, she's always with him, rather as in Jack-and-the-Beanstalk. She's like whatever his father does, the grandmother will be on the boy's side, no matter how, how sinful he's been. In this case, of course, incest. So she gives her grandson a magic wand to which he can cling if he happens to fall. So the two men arrived at the foot of the rock. The father erected a long pole and ordered his son to climb it. The latter had hardly reached the nest when the father knocked the pole down. The boy only just had time to thrust the wand into a crevice. He remained suspended in the void, crying for help while the father went off. Our hero noticed a creeper within reach of his hand. He grasped hold of it and with difficulty dragged himself to the top of the rock. After a rest, now I'm going to read the next bit. I don't want you to remember the Jack-and-the-Beanstalk. Jack-and-the-Beanstalk's got up in the sky. He's kind of stuck there for a bit. And remember how hungry he was. Well, we're going to find the same motif. The language is slightly different, in some ways more comical, but it's you can see very clearly that when you're up in the sky, when you're in the land of the dead, you're not feasting, you're not eating roast meat, you're likely to be hungry, and any flesh that is going to be raw. And if the stories are going to go to their logical conclusion, instead of you in the land of the dead eating, you are the feast, you are the food. Fee, fi, fo, fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman in the Jack-and-the-Beanstalk version. So I'm reading out again from the first myth in The Raw and the Cooked. After rest, he set out to look for food, made a bow and arrows out of branches, and hunted the lizards which abounded on the plateau. He killed a lot of them and hooked the surplus ones to his belt and to the strips of cotton wound round his legs and ankles. But the dead lizards went bad and gave off such a vile smell that the hero fainted. The vultures fell upon him, devoured first of all the lizards, and then attacked the body of the unfortunate youth, beginning with his buttocks. Pain restored him to consciousness, and the hero drove off his attackers, which, however, had completely gnawed away his hindquarters. Having eaten their fill, the birds were prepared to save his life. Taking hold of his belt and the strips of cotton round his arms and legs with their beaks, they lifted him into the air and deposited him gently at the foot of the mountain. The hero regained consciousness as if he were awakening from a dream. He was hungry and ate wild fruits, but noticed that since he had no rectum, he was unable to retain the food, which passed through his body without even being digested. And then the hero remembers a little tip. Yes, another one of these helpful tips from his grandmother had given him, and she told him what to do if you happen to have your hindquarters gnawed off by vultures. What you do is you pound some tubers and you make a kind of dough, and you stick this dough onto your backside, and you should be able to hold your food in now instead of it all falling out. And so he does that, and the story ends with he comes he's back on Earth. He's able to eat. Comes fully alive. He's now got shamanic powers, rain-making powers, and he decides to use this to put out everybody's fires. Everybody in the whole village, they're all extinguished except for one, which is his grandmother's flame. And then, no surprise here really, he turns himself into an animal, into a deer with his antlers. He charges at his father, kills him, and pushes him into a lake. The key thing here is that we have two males fighting over females, and they go up and down, incest marriage, if you like, this world and the other world, this world and the other world. And it's through that experience of dying and coming alive again, and in fact through a kind of incest, that you acquire magical power, shamanic power, rainmaking power. Well, I read that, I don't know when it was first translated. I tried to read the French version, but I'm not really good at reading French. And so it was in the early 70s that I read that. And I read the whole of mythology as the different volumes came out, the last one coming out in translation in 1981. But I was absolutely spellbound. And because I read it all very carefully, unlike so many people, I was convinced by Lévi-Strauss's argument, because he argued that all these stories are, in a very strict sense, variations on a theme. At the end of the day, they're one myth only. And as I mentioned last time I was speaking a fortnight ago, he suggests that if you wanted to start with a story, in other words, if there was a story which makes the simplest possible logical point of departure for all the stories, he picks on a story which is found right across North and South America, which is the origins of the spots on the moon, which is again a story about incest, because it's a story about a woman, a girl, who's her coming of age. She's starting to menstruate. She's in seclusion, and she noticed that somebody's in her bed, having sex with her, in fact. And she wondered who it was. And in the morning, again, you can see how similar it is to the bird nest story I've just read. In the morning, she looks at all the different boys. Some versions are all lined up, and only one of them is covered in menstrual blood or other very hard to mistake stains. And so, it turns out that it was her brother. So everybody chases the young scoundrel, and he climbs up into the sky. And he's still there because, of course, he's the moon, and you can still see the spots on his face, the menstrual blood caused by the sex he had with his sister. Which, of course, Lévi-Strauss himself says this is a very good starting point. But, of course, those of us who've been working with Jerome Lewis and discussing Jerome's work among the Bengali will also know the story that Jerome tells. Woman's biggest husband is the moon. And again, it's hardly necessary to say this is a Bengali story from the Congo in Africa, because of course it's a story absolutely all over the world. I mean, the very word menstruation means, I mean, the way it's put in one culture after another, I don't think there are any exceptions, is I am with the moon, I've been with the moon has visited me, it's my moon time. Whenever a woman menstruates, it's because the moon has been with her. And of course, again, linked to that is the idea that although the moon is in the sky, and you can see the spots, sky and earth come together in the sense that the moon comes down to earth once a month, dark moon, and the proof of the fact that it's come down to earth, visiting all the world's women, is menstruation itself. And so many of these stories about the moon coming down to earth will say that the moon, again, these are trickster stories, that the moon man that visits women is a trickster. One of the comical ways of describing this is that this moon has an extraordinarily long, curly penis, which seems to get everywhere, because when the moon does come down to earth, it's not just one or two women who start to menstruate. All the world's women menstruate together in mythology, of course. So anyway, I read all this, totally convinced by Lévi-Strauss's argument, and I should perhaps stress that Lévi-Strauss himself makes very clear that synchronized menstruation is the secret of these stories. He kind of gets it kind of politically the wrong way around. He accepts the sort of male version of the stories. Many of these stories are, for obvious reasons, patriarchal, because so many societies are patriarchal. So he kind of takes at face value, in some ways, the message of the story is that if men aren't in control over women, they won't synchronize properly. So men have to sort of discipline women and subject them to, in his phrase, les règles. Because if women are allowed to menstruate whenever they please, everything will be in total chaos. But anyway, he certainly sees the absolute centrality of menstrual synchrony with the moon as kind of one of the fundamentals, perhaps the fundamental engine driving all of these stories. So what I'm saying is that when I'd read all this, and I may have time to come back to one of the last stories in the whole of mythology, we'll see. What I'm saying is that I just thought, well, clearly, if all the 1,000 stories that Lévi-Strauss has looked at from North and South America are variations on a theme, one myth only, why would you stop at the Pacific, or why would you stop at the Atlantic? Surely the whole, the stories across the whole world ought to be further demonstration of the basic argument that Lévi-Strauss is making. So I can't quite remember now exactly when it was, but I decided to pick up a book on Australian Aboriginal mythology. And it just so happened that the first myth I turned to, just flicking through the pages, was a bird nester story. And I'm going to see if I can get hold of that one now and read it out, because I think you'll be convinced that it is indeed a bird nester story. There were once two brothers, the eldest of whom, Nabod Kitkit, had two women whom he kept hidden in the bush. One day, the younger brother, Kimuri, was out hunting when he found these two women. Not knowing that his brother had claimed them, he returned home. "Brother," he said, "today I found two women in the bush. There's one for you and one for me." Nabod Kit disagreed. No, he said, you are too young to have a woman. I could not let you have one. It's better that I have the two of them. Kimuri pretended to concede. Soon, however, he had thought of a ruse. Brother, he said, I have found an eagle's nest in a tree, and there are two young eagles in the nest. Come and I'll show you. They arrived at a low tree. Climb up, said Kimuri. It's not very high. But no sooner had the elder brother begun to climb than the tree began to grow. What is the matter with this tree? He called down. I'm a long way from the ground already. Why? Called back Kimuri. You're not halfway up yet. It looks a long way down to you, but you're still only a little way above me. So Nabon Kit went on climbing. Some time later, he heard his brother calling from a long way off that he still had not climbed very far. Nabon Kit climbed and climbed until at last he reached the eagle's nest. When he looked down, he saw his brother on the ground a long way away. Then he saw that just below him, a huge, smooth knot had grown all around the trunk of the tree. There was no way he could get down. He now realized that his brother had sung the tree and made it grow, and also causing a huge knot to form around the trunk. Ha ha, my brother, the victim heard Kimuri calling, you'll never get down out of that tree. There you will die. You wouldn't let me have one of your women. Now you can watch me take them both. I'm going a long way from here now. Bye-bye, my brother. Nabod Kit was stranded in the sky all through the rain time, all through the time that the grass came tall and green over the plains. He stayed there until the grass was brown and whitening. Then in the time of the cold weather, a great wind bent and shook the tree and tossed out the dry bones of Nabod Kit into the grass far below. As the bones hit the grass, they sat up, for Nabon Kit was a great doctor. He began to crawl about, catching lizards, centipedes, and little birds, gradually putting flesh and sinews back onto his body. He set off in pursuit of Kimuri, eventually found him with his two wives, killed all three of them, and travelled on alone. There are actually quite a few Northern Australian stories of that kind, which end with a I don't know, just end with this image of a loner, a man who is now above it all, who's now, and he's got no fear, and he's a kind of terrifying figure. And of course, it kind of somehow fits that in areas of Australia which are pretty patriarchal, you've got these patriarchs these healers, doctors, who have that vision of themselves and of the world. It's sort of premonitions of so many other things which happen, I think, to masculinity in history as a whole. Now, okay, right. I'm going to, I think, having done that story from Northern Australia, a clear bird nester story, perhaps I should just, instead of moving on, just say what to me is clearly happening. First of all, when you're up in the sky, you don't eat, you're hungry. Now, I've argued that the root of all these stories is the waxing and waning of the moon, driving, as it does, the menstrual cycle. And when a woman or women jointly, as in our model of human origins we think would have happened, when women are jointly declaring, we are sacred. Some things are sacred, namely our bodies. Our blood makes our bodies sacred. When women are in solidarity in that way together with each other, in seclusion, one of the ways which Sir James Fraser put it in The Golden Bough is, the sun may not shine on your head and your feet may not touch the ground. So you're kind of out of this world, but you're certainly not cooking, and you're certainly not consuming anything, let alone red meat, roast meat. Obviously, you don't starve. Certain kinds of food are permissible, but a considerable hunger is involved in being in menstrual seclusion. In a way, you're dead to this world of marriage and ordinary life, cooking and all the other things, marital sex and so on. Of course, you're dead to that world. And you're no longer a wife. Women are no longer wives. The women have metamorphosed into a different kinship category, namely sisters. And of course, if women are turned into sisters, then there are no husbands either, because you can't really be a husband if you haven't got a wife to be a husband toward. So the blood triggers a reversal from wives metamorphosing into sisters and from husbands now metamorphosing into brothers. Now, you've only got to sort of stretch the metaphor a little bit and make it a bit more interesting, a bit more of a story, to say that what happens now is that all the husbands are being killed and being replaced by brothers. And all the wives have been killed and been replaced by sisters. And so the fact that you die as a wife and come alive as a sister is translated to the stories as the wife's being killed and the sister's taking over and the husband has been killed and the brother's taking over. So you've got these two categories of men and two categories of women. And lo and behold, they move between heaven and earth and sky, life and death in a cyclical fashion. And the stories are just expressing that in a narrative format. And the reason why the stories are all variations of a theme is because, and this is something which Lévi-Strauss doesn't want to concede, doesn't want to talk about. It's actually because heaven and earth in real life are connected. What do I mean by that? Well, all societies have some kind of religion, some kind of area of spiritual life. Last time we were dealing with all this, we were talking about the trickster. So, I mean, the idea that religion is like, you know, hunter-gatherers are bowing and scraping in front of sovereigns and kings and despots is absolutely ludicrous. Hunter-gatherers have the trickster, and the trickster is a figure of fun. He flits between life and death, male and female, animal and human, and it's all a hilarious joke. And he's an idiot as well as a creator. And of course, Camilla told us the wonderful story about God's testicles. But still, it's a fact that hunter-gatherers, like everyone else, have. I sometimes in my book, actually, in Blood Relations, I even felt uncomfortable about calling it religion. I'd rather talk about magic, really, than religion, because religion does have the connotation of a kind of, you know, a kind of establishment of powerful spiritual figures bearing down on our poor humans down on earth. But certainly, something like religion in a wider sense, including magic, is everywhere. And when I say that heaven and earth are really connected, what I mean by that is that the spirits really do become real. I mean, they become incarnate. They acquire flesh. So the spirit, the tricksters of hunter-gatherer folklore, grab hold, if you like, of real people. So, for example, the Eland Bull, one of the versions of a trickster in the Kalahari, in similar parts of it, similar, doesn't have to be an eland or everywhere, it can be a spot. But if you like, the gods come down to earth. The eland takes the bodily form of a girl going through her first menstruation. She becomes the eland. There's a connection between heaven and earth, and that's ritual. Ritual is the form of human activity that connects the other world with this world. There's that connection. Now, Lévi-Strauss was emphatic that ritual is what he called a bastard. It confuses everything. It does the opposite of what myth does. He said the myth is cognitive, intellectual, structured, digital, all those nice things that come from, I won't go into it all, but I mean, from sort of formalistic linguistics, Jacobson's idea of distinctive features. And ritual, and Lévi-Strauss complained about this, he said the trouble with ritual is it messes everything up. Because instead of getting nice things like masculine and feminine, you get men who cross-dress to be a shaman. You got men who put antlers on their heads to become animals. So all the nice distinctions between nature and culture get jumbled up in ritual. And so he tried to make out, because he was interested in where the myths come from, he didn't want to think they came out of ritual, he wanted to think they came out of the head. And the human mind is this sort of digital computer idea. Lévi-Strauss didn't want to talk about ritual, he wanted to kind of do away with ritual, and he wrote a book called Totemism and another like that, sort of cutting away of the ritual domain. Having said that, I mean, very, very few other anthropologists agreed with Lévi-Strauss. They also, it's quite clear that what happens to myths is that they become part of life. They're acted out in ritual performance. Anyway, the critical thing I want to do now is turn to a part of the world where until very recently, and there are other parts of the world, of course, the kind of fairy tales that we're familiar with in Europe and other parts of the world, but like Jack-and-the-Beanstalk and these other fairy tales, they are still acted out, or have been until very recently acted out in ritual. And I want to, because we're talking about not being stuck, and we're talking about forms of life, death, male, female, heaven, earth, interplay, constant interchange between those polar opposites. I want to come now to the theme of the dragon, and then we should be able to stop. Now, I mean, anyone who's familiar with fairy tales anywhere in the world will know all about the dragon. They may be slightly different, but there are certain rules about being a dragon. One of them is you never get married. Have you ever come across a dragon who gets married? There's never been a wedding between a woman and a dragon. And there are very powerful reasons why. But just very briefly, a dragon is a snake with wings. I mean, that's one way of putting it, but it's certainly a creature which is kind of an animal. It's a reptile or a snake. But it's got human sexual. It's a dragon, virgins, or likes maidens. And it's if you think about it, a snake is the lowest of creatures. It hasn't got legs. It crawls along the ground. Or if it's a water snake, it's under the water. But it's the lowest creature and the highest because it's a snake with wings. And the snake, usually, the dragon, lives in water. It guards the water supplies, but it breathes fire. And so if you think about it, a dragon is a unity of opposites. It's the lowest and the highest. It's water and fire. It's human and animal. All those opposites, but they're not just static opposites. It's clearly the dragon is cyclical. It's moving between life and death, earth and sky, male and female, human and animal. It's constantly moving between those. And the place to find the dragon in its most fleshed out, rich form is Aboriginal Australia. And I'm not going to be able to tell the story in any detail, but the story which absolutely blew me over when I came across it, I think in the mid-70s, was from Lloyd Warner's book, A Black Civilization, a marvelous, marvelous hymn of praise to Aboriginal Australian cultural sophistication and describing, this is in Northeast Arnhem, a place called Milingimbi, a place where the missionaries hadn't done too much damage to the indigenous culture, and Warner was able to make friends with the men he was with and learn a lot about their culture in this extraordinary book. But I just want to just say, quite possibly, the myth in the literature of anthropology, which has been most talked about, studied, recorded in different versions, is called The Story of the Two Wawalak Sisters. How much time have I got, Camilla? Have I got 5 minutes? What should I do? Is Camilla there still? Or should,
yeah, just read it, Chris, or just do whatever you need. I don't think anyone minds if you go a little long.
Okay, right, thank you. So it was the mythological period, Bamun, when Wonga men walked about and modern men had not yet appeared. Now this is the start of all myths of creation, which is that the beginning is a kind of a betwixt and between. It's not just that the sky is close to the earth, but animals are close to humans, animals talk like humans, and males are like females. So everything's all merged. Everything was different. Animals were like men then. Those two Wawalak sisters had come a long distance. They were coming from the far interior toward the Arafura Sea. They were going north towards the sea from inside. The young woman was pregnant. The older carried her own baby under her arm in a paper cradle. Now these two sisters, they're clearly goddesses, and they kind of reverse everything about their gender because they carry spears and they hunt animals. And when they killed animals, they gave them the names they still have. So these were goddess figures, two sisters, and it's extraordinary how right across Australia, you almost never find a single sister. The heroines are double, they're sisters. with each other, in solidarity with each other. And they confer names on the world. In other words, they create language. They're culture creators. So when they killed the animals, they gave them the names they bear today, and they gathered all the animals that are in the country today. They said to each thing which they killed, you will be sacred by and by. So they kill a kangaroo, and they say to the kangaroo, you will soon be marraine, you will soon be sacred. Your blood will make you sacred. And it's a kind of prophecy. So they talk one language, then another language, then another language as they cross the border, making up each language as they move. And we're told that they had both, at the start of the journey, had sex with men of their own moiety, dua. So the reason why one of them has a baby is because of her incest. And the reason why the other one is pregnant is, again, because she must have had sex with a clan brother. It doesn't mean a brother in our sense, of course. It means a brother. Again, when I use those terms like incest, remember a woman's biggest husband is the moon, or the moon is a woman's brother. This is the moon that visits you, and of course, it's not your husband. It's a kind of a reverse husband. So that's the kind of incest we're talking about, I think, in all these stories. The two women stopped to rest, for the younger felt the child she was carrying move inside her. She knew her baby would soon be born. Yepa, sister, I feel near my heart this baby turning, she said. The older one said, then let us rest. They sat down, and I want to just emphasize this. You have this very moving image now of physical intimacy, tenderness between these two sisters helping each other. The older sister put her hand on the abdomen of the younger sister and felt the child moving inside. She then massaged her younger sister, but she knew her labor pains had commenced. The baby was born there. So after the child was born, the older sister gathered more bush food, and then the two moved on toward the sea, stopping at various places, giving them their names. Come on, sister, said the older one, we'll go quickly now. They hurried on. Now, they didn't stop until they arrived at a waterhole, a massive waterhole called Miramina, which means snake swallows, or it's also, another name is called Dicharima, which is a sacred name meaning menstruation blood. It's a waterhole in the country of this particular clan, the Lialaumia clan, and it is in the bottom of this well, in the deep subterranean waters, below the upper waters, that Yulunga, the python totem of the Dua moiety, lives. So what's happened is that the sister makes a drill to make fire, and she started trying to cook the animals which they'd gathered. But what happened is that, and again, this is the same motif as we've been looking at all the time. I've been describing how Jack, when he's up in the sky, he's hungry, how the bird nester is hungry because he hasn't got an anus. Well, these sisters are hungry, and why are they hungry? Is because every time they put a kangaroo or a bandicoot or any other animal that they killed, remember they prophesied you will soon be sacred. They put the animal on the fire, and something puzzling happens. As soon as each animal or plant was placed on the fire, it jumped out, ran to the waterhole, and jumped into it. The crab ran in first. When he did this, the two women taught Lialaumia for the first time. Before this, they had taught Wawalak. The other plants and animals followed the crab. The yams ran like men, as did the iguanas, frill-necked lizards, darpa, ovacus neck, rock pythons, seagulls, sea eagles, native companions, and crocodiles. Each ran and dived into the totemic well and disappeared from sight. So what happens now is that these raw animals, what should happen is you go from raw to being cooked and then eaten. But here it's everything is an action replay in reverse. They're raw, and they go to even more raw, which is alive. And they jump from fire into water, and they do it like men. They run on two legs as if they're men. So there is everything inedible about them. The fact that they're human and raw and live is emphasized in the story. Now, the older sister, in going out to gather bark for the cradle of her sister's baby, walked over some of the waterholes some of the water of the Miramina well. Her menstrual blood fell into the totem. And I think I'm going to be a little bit quick now. What happens is that afterbirth blood and menstrual blood combine in the well. And the different versions of the story make it clear. That is why the well water is sacred. It's sacred because of the menstrual blood flowing into it. And it's the combination of the flows of the two sisters which generate this, what's interpreted in one way as a disaster on the outside, and on the other way as as an arrival at comfort, security, and joy. Because what happens is that out of the waterhole comes the rainbow snake, or the all mother, as she's often called. Although if she's a mother, she's a strange one because she's kind of got masculine characteristics. And again, if the snake or rainbow snake, and by the way, I should stress, we're dealing with a dragon. It's not called a dragon in Australia. It's clearly the same entity. If this dragon or rainbow snake is male, it's a male with breasts, or it's a male with a womb. So it's gender ambivalent as well as species ambivalent. And what happens now is that this creature swallows the sisters, rises into the sky, crashes down to earth. The sisters are now dead. So meat ants bite their bodies. They come back alive. They're swallowed again. They go up to the sky. They come down. So they go between life, death, life, death, life, death several times until finally the rainbow snake spits them out. Whereupon they turn to stone, and you can still see the Wawalek sisters in the Wawalek in the country around Milingimbi. You can see these shapes of rocks, which are clearly the sisters turned to stone. And then the story ends. Perhaps I'll move to the end because I'll be going nearly an hour. Let's just go to the end of the story. Right. While all this great drama had been, okay. So the snake left them there and came back to his own country. The two women turned to stone, and one can still see them in the Wawalek country today. While all this great drama was being acted out in the country of the Lialaumia, two Wawalek Wonga men had heard the terrible noise of the snake's voice, the thunder, and they'd seen the skies filled with lightning and felt the downpour of the rain. They knew something was the matter. So these are Wonga men who are not properly formed as men yet, who coming and they notice all these signs of a terrible struggle, all these footprints in the sand where the sisters and the snake were having this huge tussle and the sisters got swallowed up. And they finally saw the snake tracks. I think the sisters had trouble, said one of the men. I think that maybe a crocodile or a python has killed them. They arrived at Niramina. They had followed the Goida River down. They saw all the ants walking around everywhere, like they smelled something that was dead and they wanted to eat. Then they found all the snake tracks. The well water shone like a rainbow. When they saw this, they knew there was a snake in there. They went farther in the bush and saw the ceremonial ground where Yolunga's fall had made the dance places. Wonga python has been here, they said. When they looked carefully at the stone, they found blood from the heads of the two women. What happened is that the snake is attracted by their blood, of course, but he wanted a bit more. So he bit them on the head to make more blood so that he could swallow them more easily. And of course, I'm reminded of fee, fi, fo, fum. I smell the blood of an Englishman. You have to be bloody to be swallowed by one of these monsters, one of these dragons or snakes. You don't, they don't seem to like cooked meat. That doesn't how dragons work. So what will we do? Run and get some paper bark and make a basket, said the older Wawalek man. They gathered 2 baskets of blood and went to the dance grounds. They made a bush house on the part of the ground that represents the snake's tail. You take all the hooked feathers, bush cotton, and this blood, and we'll paint ourselves. You do this, and I shall go and cut a hollow log and make a Yolunga trumpet. This is the sort of thunderous sound of the rainbow snake. I mean, the real sound is the thunder, but you can sort of imitate it with this great hollow log that you blow raspberries into. It makes a pretty impressive sound. Each did his task. The hollow ridgepole from the Wawalek sisters' house, that's the menstrual hut or parturition hut, was used for the trumpet totemic emblem of Yolunga. And now this is the last part of the story. The sun went down. They left the blood till morning. They slept. And while they were in a deep sleep, they dreamed of what the 2 women sang and danced when they were trying to keep Yolunga from swallowing them. The Wawalek women came back as spirits and taught the 2 men the Junguan songs and dances that for the outside general camp and the inside one. Now, these are the different rituals, initiation rituals, and there's kind of hierarchy of rituals. And at the very bottom, they're not so secret. It doesn't really mean women are supposed to know too much about them, but they're not that secret. But then you get a higher level and a higher level and a higher level until you get the absolute ultimate top secret level, which is the level where the women in the story sang Yulunga and menstrual blood, linking together rainbow snake and menstrual blood, whereupon they got themselves swallowed. You have to remember they got themselves swallowed. They have agency. They needed to be swallowed by the rainbow snake, and they were swallowed by their singing. And then so the Wabaluk women came back as spirits and taught the two men the songs and dances that are for the outside general camp and the inside ones for the men's camp. They told the men the way to do the ceremonies. Notice the women know all the secrets. They're the ones that give the men the secrets that they've got. They sang Yulunga and Muit. The men slept on and dreamed that Yulunga brought out all the iguanas from the Miramina well. The two sisters said to the men, and this is the final message of these Dreamtime sisters to mankind today. This is all now. We are giving you this dream so you can remember these important things. You must never forget these things that we have told you tonight. You must remember every time, each year, these songs, these dances. You must paint with blood and feathers from Andiela, Gunabibi, and Jungawan. You must dance all the things we saw and named on our journey and which ran away into the world. So dance, making all those kangaroos and other animals, make them come alive, jump from the fire, refuse to be cooked, and jump for safety into the great waterhole. And this is the last lines. After the men danced the new dances and ceremonies for the first time, they went back to their own country. We dance these things now because our Wonga ancestors learned them from those two Wabalak sisters. Okay, that's that marvelous, magnificent myth. Extraordinarily, I mean, I should perhaps stress as well that Lloyd Warner had to piece together the myth. It's so secret, so long, so extensive that the people themselves never tell the story. They act it all out, and little bits of the story become clear through the procedures involved in the ritual. It's a little bit like, I remember as a Catholic, it's hard to, nobody ever tells you the whole story of Jesus, but you go through confirmation, you go through christening, you go through all the various things, you go to somebody's funeral, you gradually find out about the whole story by going to church and going through the ceremonies. It's a little bit like that. You have to go through these rituals in order to piece together the story, which is sort of too big to be told in one go. And I think I'm going to stop, except just to sort of say, there's a question here, which is, why does all this matter? Well, I think it does matter, because these stories are telling us something. Myths are a little bit like dreams, aren't they? They're dreams. Dreams tell you things, but when you think about it, what happens when you're told, when you have a very powerful dream and you wake up in the morning, the dream's telling you something. It's not exactly, you can't. There's almost no intentionality behind it. You can't say somebody's trying to tell me something, because of course it's you, but it's a part of you that has been blocking stuff out from knowing. Which is telling you something in a dream, and the dream tells you things in this strange way with all these strange metaphors and things, because of course you've got your own censorship. That part of Freud, I think, is absolutely right. You don't, there's all kinds of things which your sort of moral higher brain would be worried about if you were too explicit about things. Mythology is dreaming, of course, but the thing about a myth, and of course they're told around the fireside, they're told towards the evening, they're told when there are shadows, when you can't see things very well, that you're free of all immediate responsibilities, you're just telling stories, you're having fun. What's happening is that your dreaming is connecting up with the dreamings that other people are having. And a myth is a collective dream. And it just so happens that all of us around the planet kind of are, or at least were, maybe we're losing it these days, but we are or were sharing a dream. And the dream is how we became human. That is actually what Claude Lévi-Strauss is saying. He does his theory of how we became human is not at all convincing. I won't go into all that now, but it really is not at all convincing. But still, he's right to say these stories are telling us something very, very important. It is rather important that we treat these stories the way Lévi-Strauss is, at least in this regard. These are crystallized intelligence. They sometimes seem absurd, we've heard from Camilla the other week about the God's testicles. I mean, they're often wonderfully funny stories. And what tends to happen when anthropologists look at these, we kind of miss out on the humour. They're very often they made us. It's like you have to laugh, otherwise you'd cry. These are difficult issues, death, and cruelty, and illness, and all these things. But somehow we've got to get over them all. And I think it does matter that these stories are treated with a level of intellectual respect that Claude Lévi-Strauss gave them. They're telling us something very important. They're actually telling us about, as I started out this talk, about that moment. It was an extended moment. It must have come and gone. There must have been moments of stability and success and moments when this or that population lost it. But that is still a kind of moment when the world was turned upside down and we established morality and language and culture. And it was an extraordinary moment. And one of the best ways of working out what exactly it was that happened is through the techniques that Lévi-Strauss gave us. And I would still say, as no one else ever gave us, techniques to make sense of these myths. So that's it.
Thank you, Chris. That was amazing covering the ground there. You did a fantastic job of a roundup. So many aspects of stories to discuss. I think people are pretty impressed. There are quite a lot of extra stories in the chat as well, which maybe some people would like to mention. Are there questions? Does anybody want to come up, be brave and put their hand up and try and, or just comments? Anyone? Tam, go for it.
Hello, great stuff, Chris. Thank you, hugely inspiring as ever. When you spoke about ritual and Lévi-Strauss's attitude towards it, and then I was thinking about with Graeber, what I've picked up previously about him saying that ritual is always top down.
Yeah.
They both seem to have this blockage. I mean, was Graeber looking at Lévi-Strauss on that basis and agreeing with him, or have they come at that from different angles?
I don't think Graeber's taking it from Lévi-Strauss at all, and actually it is a weak point of both of Graeber and Wengrow, the whole area of mythology. They're really very, very weak on myth, almost nothing at all that I've come across. But yes, the way I'd reply to that is to say that ever since the immediate post-war period, I've written a whole book on this. It's called Decoding Chomsky, and nobody wants to read this book because they think it's all about Noam Chomsky. It's actually nothing to do with Noam Chomsky in many ways. Okay. It's an anthropological account of how the world got turned upside down and how Marxism, materialism, in other words, a kind of science which starts with the body and builds up towards the mind from bodily interaction and processes, subsistence, how all that was turned upside down after the Second World War. And the way in which it happened was that I haven't time to go into it, but mind over matter became the sort of mantra. The mind is free. The mind is not changed. Freedom, freedom, freedom. It seems to me that exactly that idea of freedom, instead of I read Hegel at an early stage, his phenomenology of mind and Hegel's logic. Freedom for Hegel is the recognition of necessity. There's another kind of freedom which has got nothing to do with this necessity. It's kind of just let's be free, and the mind is sort of a kind of mind over matter idea. And I think it's more that we find in the dawn of everything. The idea that we're all a bit stuck, and what we've got to do is sort of snap out of it and think up another story, as if another story is what we need, another myth. It's a complicated argument, of course, because in some ways I agree. We need to think differently from the way we're doing. But to answer your question, Tam, I would say that Lévi-Strauss's rejection of ritual was part of a massive movement overturning materialism, and in his case, in Lévi-Strauss's case, it was partly overturning Marx, but perhaps even more explicitly overturning Durkheim, because Durkheim, for all his faults, was a materialist. So mind over matter became the mantra. I don't think David Wengrow and David Graeber are getting this directly from Lévi-Strauss, but it's part of the. If you want to, it's okay. Put it this way: if you want to be popular, if you want to be up there, if you want to be fashionable, talk about the mind. I mean, anyone, I've got a library here, quite a big library. I've got about, I don't know, 60 books. The Mind in the Cave, the Prehistory of Mind, this mind. It's all about the mind. As Warner points out, you have to start with the body. Bodies can be articulate, bodies in motion, bodies do things. What this mind stuff is patriarchal rubbish. I mean, the point when all these wretched people are all into the mind when their bodies are doing rather unpleasant things. I mustn't say all that. Okay, I mustn't say all that. Okay.
And also it's connecting with children, because the thing with these myths and fairy tales is that what these immediately do is reconnect us with children as well, rather than separating off. And that's what's so important about it all as well. It's joining together the generations.
Children need these fairy tales. It's like nourishment. I mean, the idea that you protect children in a little space of Mummy and Mary and John helping, Mummy and Daddy bring the food back from the supermarket. I mean, that's not helpful for children. Children need their own way of dealing with difficult issues, and going around sanitizing the fairy tales is a ridiculous project in my view. They're kind of fine as they are. So anyway, another whole is, of course, we have to remember that these tales were not for children originally. They were for everybody. I mean, God's testicles.
The initiation ritual.
Yeah.
And just to add in that, it's a very interesting observation that both Graeber and Lévi-Strauss, from their different direction, have come to this same sort of ritual. But Durkheim, I think, is the linchpin, because Lévi-Strauss had a completely kind of dialectic opposite viewpoint from Durkheim because of his rubbishing of ritual and refusal to address it, really. Whilst Graeber also really, as an anarchist, he really attacked and really had a very uncomfortable relationship. He almost thought of Durkheim in terms of the Nuremberg rallies, the idea that ritual took over everyone's minds and brainwashed them. And it's again, the way that Graeber and Wengrow discuss Durkheim in their book, they have this peculiar notion of Durkheim's sacredness being something like a private property, which is stripping away all of the thing that Durkheim's usually associated with in terms of collective effervescence, people's collective dancing together and therefore sharing of emotion. So all of that kind of gets removed. Both Lévi-Strauss and Graeber-Wengrow do exactly the same thing from very different ends of political spectrum.
Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We've got some other very interesting points in the chat. Does anybody else have a question? Mind and body dualism. Does anybody want to say anything there? And Dan or anyone else? And there's also some great stories being told. Amarjit, you had some wonderful stories about Vrita, the serpent who guards the water, and how similar. That's the serpent of the Rig Veda, yes? But these are examples of kind of serpents and dragons from the Indian mythology, with, of course, dragon killers involved, with Indra as the dragon killer, whereas the rainbow snake tends to not end up being killed. The rainbow snake goes on and on in the dreaming, and nobody ever kills the rainbow snake.
I mean, I would encourage everybody here to be, I don't know, to be cantankerous. I mean, the theory I put forward it's not generally accepted. It's not mainstream at all. I am saying that the dragon is ritually synchronized menstruation. The dragon isn't a creature. It isn't some fossil dinosaur. It isn't a particular kind of snake or something. It's a ritual phenomenon, namely a picket line of women dancing together, synchronizing their blood and forming a great circle. Something like that. So the reason the dragon is cyclical, between heaven and earth, all those things, is because it's human beings, namely mostly women but women with their sons and brothers in solidarity, turning into this kind of creature for ritual purposes. All I'm saying is, I mean, I've come across other theories about the dragon. I've heard of a theory which is that it's really water. I've heard a theory that people might have found fossilized dinosaurs, and it's the dragon. I found all kinds of other theories. This theory is my theory. I will say that it is pretty close to Claude Lévi-Strauss's ideas about synchronized menstruation behind everything, but on the other hand, there are differences. So I suppose what I'm saying is there ought to be more incredulity among some of you. What on earth is Chris Knight saying? Menstrual synchrony, and that's the rainbow snake? God's sake, I've never heard that one before. So feel free. And of course, there is a problem which some people say Chris Knight's got menstruation on his brain. I mean, that's another one as well.
Amarjit, do you want to say a little bit about those amazing Indian stories? Because I don't think it's challenging. It's very interesting. And you're being asked also, Dan, is the slaying of the dragon a reenactment of the overthrowing of matrilineal society?
It is exactly that. You put it beautifully.
And Amarjit is saying the same. It's like the
Can anybody hear me?
Yes.
Right. I think many of these Hindu tales are actually kind of patriarchal tales. You know, they have their roots going back to the indigenous society. What the Brahmin priest did was to take over some of these indigenous tales from the matrilineal societies, and they kind of turn them into their sort of a dialectical opposite, you know, to make their point.
Yeah.
So women are cursed, you know, with every month. Because of the killing of Vritra, which is, you know, is blamed. Although Indra, the patriarchal war god of the Aryans, killed Vritra, who's sometime he, sometime she, sometime, you know, right? But women are blamed for it, and that's why women are impure. First day of the month, I think, is the degradation of purity. You know, one day they are impure like an untouchable. On third day, they're impure like something else. And then on the fourth day, they can have a ceremonial bath, and then they become pure again. But this tale is repeated in, I think, 2 or 3 different scriptures. But generally speaking, I think in India, the priesthood take over many of these tales from indigenous society, and they just give them its own spin. And it's been quite challenging for me in the last few years trying to make head or tail out of these myths. But I'm fortunate that, you know, that I was able to attend these evening classes, you know, at UCL. And then after a while, it began to make sense, you know, why they are the way they are.
Thank you very much. I've got some questions. Is Dasha? I can't quite.
Dasha.
Yeah.
Dasha asking about ritual. Clarify on the ritual.
Okay. I mean, let me come to a modern day ritual. When I was at my college, the University of East London, for many, many years, I was chair of the union branch. And every now and again, we'd perform a ritual. And the ritual consisted of going up to management and complaining about whatever it was we were complaining about, but sometimes it was wages. And we would organize a strike. And the strike has a sort of certain format. You need to put pickets on the gates. You need to come up with your placards. You know, in our case, because we'd had a bit of a revolution in the university, the vice chancellor would bring us cups of tea on the picket line. But I mean, a picket line is a form of bottom-up ritual collectivist action. And the argument that I'm making and have been making for whatever it is, 40, 50 years, is that the world became cultural and moral when women formed a picket line, when women started resisting sexual abuse and harassment, went on strike, linked arms, established that some things are sacred, namely their bodies, and made their strike a general strike by synchronizing with the moon, which is, the moon doesn't know any borders. The moon is the same moon wherever you go. And if it's dark moon and you're deciding that's the time to go on strike, then you've got a very effective general strike. So that's my answer.
Right.
This is Darsha. I was asking about why, I guess it was Levi-Strauss thought it was a bad thing, ritual. Can you explain that?
Oh, yes. Sorry, yes. Okay, thank you very much, Darsha. No, sorry, I see, yes. No, I'll try and be fairly brief, but it's a very important question, this. He started out studying kinship. He wrote a wonderful book called The Elementary Structures of Kinship. Completely revolutionized the study of kinship by putting all the world's different kinship systems into a single framework. And his argument was that these apparently irrational taboos, you mustn't talk to your mother-in-law, you mustn't have sex with this cousin or that cousin, all those things were actually rules of exchange and reciprocity. The idea was that you need to have circulation. Women, men, children, animals need to be circulating. And if you allow certain kinds of relationships, you clog everything up. And it's like your plumbing system gets clogged, So that was the elementary structures of kinship. But he then had second thoughts. He thought, I've been trying all along to show that these elementary structures of kinship, I've been trying to show they emanate from the way the human mind is structured. But he says, of course, because kinship is bound up with demography and economics and subsistence and people getting old and people getting young and I don't know, all this stuff, he says it could be that the structures don't emanate from the mind, but they come from practical life itself, which is an argument which I would make and Karl Marx would make and Durkheim might have made. So he said, now what I want to do is have a more convincing demonstration that these beautiful crystalline mathematical structures, they just come out of the head. So he said, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to turn to a domain of study. I'm going to look at certain kinds of things which don't have a function, which aren't for anything. Myths. Myths, there's no reason why myths should be this way or that way. They don't do anything. They don't have a function. And so even in this area where, in a way, with the myth, you can make a man come alive again. You make them defy gravity. You can make them suddenly turn into a kangaroo or something. There's no rules. So he says that if even in this area, mythology, you discover there are scientific rules which apply, then where else can these rules come from but the nature of the mind? Now, the one problem that's still left there was that you could still argue that ritual, which is involved with real life, itself shapes myths, which of course is true. They do. Rituals do shape myths. They do constrain them. So he had to dig away ritual by calling it a bastard. When I say a bastard, I mean literally. He says Richard's a bastard. He ends up the fourth volume of mythology saying Richard's a bastard. By a bastard, he means it's a patriarchal term, isn't it? So only a patriarch can accuse somebody of being a bastard. It means there's not a clear line of paternity, which I can discern. And then he sort of says, ritual, everything's all mixed up. Nature and culture, animal and human, male, and all these shamans that cross-dress, all these shamans that wear antlers. He didn't like ritual. And the reason he didn't like ritual is because it messes up the nice, neat digital distinctions, nature, culture, masculine, feminine, animal, human, which he thinks emerged from the digital, computer-like structure of the human brain. This is the period when computers were getting off the ground, of course. And I've written a whole book about it all, another book called Decoding Chomsky. And so he just didn't like ritual.
More precisely, a bastardization of thought.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Ritual is a bastardization of thought.
Bastardization of thought.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, that's a more correct formulation. That is exactly the words he used.
Yeah. Let's be precise and accurate.
Ritual is the bastardization of thought. That's exactly it.
Yeah.
So he has this picture of the mind desperately trying to separate things and ritual evilly, maliciously confusing everything.
there is another question. Dan, do you want to ask this question on the sex strike? Do you want to say something, or is your sound? I don't know. It's
So yeah, I mean, yeah, just what I said there in the chat, really. Just
I don't see the chat. I'm not very competent.
What's that? Sorry.
Just that you need to say it because I don't always see the chat.
Oh, okay, right. So when you're talking about women forming the picket line, going on strike, are you talking about a sex strike?
Yeah.
Is that what you mean? Yeah.
That's
what I thought.
No. I'm talking about an everything strike: sex, cooking, child. I mean everything, just on strike. But it has to include sex, obviously.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, you've got to make your strike.
Right. Yeah, no, it's just because this the friend of mine I said in the chat. No. And Tam was saying this is the key to the human revolution, really. This is the transition from primates to humans.
I mean, something must have happened, mustn't it, to create what we call sexual morality. For example, the incest taboo. I mean, chimpanzees don't have an incest taboo. What happens is that female chimp tries to get away from her older brother or father because she doesn't want to be hassled by these males constantly hassling. So she sort of moves away. But that's not the incest taboo. That's just one female taking measures to prevent being abused and harassed. But with humans, there's a thing called the incest taboo, and there's countless. Every single human society, but hunter-gatherers maybe particularly have a complex structure called a kinship structure, and the kinship structure is all about who you can have sex with and who you can't, or when you can have sex with somebody and when you can't. There might be times of ritual license where you can have sex with all kinds of people. At other times, you can only have sex with your legitimate wife or wives or whatever. But I mean, there's a thing called sexual morality. Where does it come from? And what I'm saying is, as a Darwinian, there's no way that the male of the species would have invented that. I mean, do I have to elaborate?
No, thank you. That's good. Yeah.
Thank you. Any more questions? We've strayed a little bit away from Jack-and-the-Beanstalk in some ways, or we need to keep that. We've gone to snakes and dragons, but we kind of need to keep the bird nest to beanstalk link, perhaps. There was some very interesting work not that long ago, which was dating by using phylogeny of Indo-European versions of The Boy Who Stole the Ogre's Treasures, which is kind of a very old version, dating Jack-and-the-Beanstalk upwards of 5,000 years old. But of course, with these bird nester variants, we must think it's even much older than that. But there were, when I was getting trolled by some of the Graeber groupies going on over Christmas, because they were very angry that these are the Graeber groupies and fans, they were very angry that we called our series The Real Dawn of Everything. And when I said that we were going to have this session on Jack-and-the-Beanstalk and the rainbow snake included in all of this, they started huffing and puffing and saying, how dare you offend sacred stories of Indigenous Australians with mere fairy tales and children's stories. And so I was really digging myself in a hole in trying to respond to that. Would you like to say anything about that, Chris?
There's a wonderful book. It's called The High Valley, I think it was. It's about Papua New Guinea rituals of initiation. Oh God, I just vaguely try. You can hardly read it. It's about male initiation. So that what happens? You get a whole line of boys, maybe 30 or 40. All due to be initiated, and in front of quite a big crowd of only men, the boys take this very sharp, razor sharp grass, and they thrust the grass up their nostrils, right down into their throats, and they raise it, put it up and down like this, and they bleed profusely from the nose, and they stagger and stagger with the noses up, and that's the sort of high point of their initiation. But I just say the description. You have to respect these people. I mean, the kind of pain they have to go through in order to menstruate, compared with, I mean, with women it comes fairly naturally, but when men have to do it, it's really, really painful. So the Jack-and-the-Beanstalk story I read out about Jack bleeding profusely from the nose, it looks as if in Cornwall, where I think the story, I mean, this particular version of the story seems to have come from, that there would have been a male initiation rite involving bleeding from the nose. I mean, of course, you don't have to use this kind of sharp spear grass to do it. You can get bonked on the nose by somebody. If somebody hitting a nose with a fist will make it bleed. But yes, I mean, this Jack-and-the-Beanstalk nosebleed is so telling. The bean sprouts up. It's kind of caused by his grandmother rather, and he says, "I'm killed," and he's starving. So I'm not quite sure what Camilla wants me to do, but more than that, I
mean, just the argument that the fairy stories may be indeed carrying messages from very ancient initiation rituals, sacred sources.
Yes, but, yeah. Sorry, Camilla. Yes, of course. I mean, clearly, I mean, the thing to realise is that Jack-and-the-Beanstalk was at one time just as secret, sacred, and to be respected as the story of Jesus dying and coming alive again. I was brought up with that one, and it permeated all my life as a boy, because being a Catholic, I had to go to special. I wasn't allowed to go to the same services at school or the same assemblies and stuff. So yes, Jack-and-the-Beanstalk was once a very sacred story, just like the story of Jesus. I say just like in the sense that it's just as important, or again, just as important as the story of the rainbow snake for the people of the Mernken people of Northeast Arnhem Land, the Yolngu, as they're known. So silly to dismiss fairy stories as just kids' stories. Of course they're not. Little Red Riding Hood, Sleeping Beauty, Cinderella, all their stories. The reason why they all concern a boy coming of age or a girl coming of age is because they were connected with initiation, and initiation would have been the primary way of passing on cultural knowledge from one generation to the next. You get these ridiculous cultural epidemiologists or cultural evolution theorists that just assume that culture gets transmitted. No, culture doesn't get transmitted. You've got to transmit it. It's quite difficult to get difficult things transmitted down the generations, so difficult that you need initiation ritual in order to achieve it. So, anyway, yes, I mean, these so-called fairy tales are all we've got left. They're disembodied, they're just tales. We don't know what the rituals were, but we can make a bit of a guess. But if we really want the rituals, go to somewhere where the rituals are still practiced. And Aboriginal Australia was a wonderful place to go in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. It's probably not quite so vibrant these days because of thanks to all the missionaries and other things, and alcohol and stuff, of course.
Manchega, you've been waiting. Go for it.
Yeah, I was wondering if there are any versions of this story that involve honey gatherers, because there's a lot of stories in the Indo-European and Semitic, like the story of Deborah and all that. The name Deborah means bee, and the name Melissa means honey. And Melissa was one of the nurses of Zeus. And Deborah occurs twice. She's a nurse to one of the matriarchs. And then that one dies. And then the next generation, there's the one in the book of Judges, who's involved in the killing of a general. And the other one's name usually means goat. Amalthea for Zeus, and who gives milk, and Yael in the Song of Deborah, who kills the enemy general by bringing him in, giving some nice milk, soothing him, and driving a stake through his head. And Deborah always is either buried under a tree for the nurse, and for the war leader, Deborah, he sits as a judge under a date palm tree. The date palm is used for honey. And there's a version of this that comes from the late encyclopedia guys for the Jews, that the trees are not date palms or anything like that. They're tamarisk. And I said, well, that blows that theory out of the water. Then it turns out that tamarisk is the tree that's now thought of locally by the native people and the Arabs and everybody as being the tree which manna comes from, because of honeydew that collects on there from the insects that go in there. And so you've got honey involved all through this stuff, and trees.
Jack, do you know the title of the second volume of Mythology?
From Honey to Ashes.
Yeah.
Yeah, well done.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, honey is kind of the opposite of blood. It's as Lévi-Strauss points out, raw meat is bloody and needs to be cooked. With honey, the bees have done the cooking. It doesn't need any cooking. It's sort of on this, it's like super cooked, more than cooked, really. But also honey has the opposite effect that blood has. So blood has the effect of separating husband and wife and connecting brother and sister as people of the same blood. Honey has a terrible potential danger, which is that you're going to get a couple on honeymoon and they're going to get very fond of each other, very, very, very fond of each other. And they're going to be having so much sweet honey with each other that you're never going to see them again. They're not going to do any useful work. The society's going to lose that couple because they're too fond of each other. And then a whole lot of other stuff about the opposite side of all this, the other side of cooked is burnt, and if it's burnt enough, you turn to ashes, and you've got these two extremes. But you're quite right. I mean, you just taught me something, because you can't know everything. I don't even vaguely claim to know very much more than Lévi-Strauss's the myths that Lévi-Strauss dealt with so beautifully in a few other stories. But and of course, the stories about the seven sisters. Very often, the seven stars are bees. Not always, of course, but clearly bees have a very sociable, collectivist little creatures, and they've got quite a bite, quite a sting, and all kinds of myths around that. But I suppose the most clear thing is the idea of the honeymoon. So a honeymoon, sexual juices, sexual fluids, sweetness. A full moon, of course, is the honeymoon. A story which mixed up honey with new moon would be just a mess. I mean, the signals would just get lost, because honey belongs with full moon and honeymoon and love and so on. But yeah, thank you very much, Manchego. Very interesting.
There's a request on the chat that's coming straight to me, but asking for recommended literature for early stories and myths, and going back for so many thousands of years. Does anybody have suggestions for that? Nicole was asking. I've given the link. I should give it to everybody else for Chris's Decoding Fairy Tales. This is the link for the Decoding Fairy Tales text that Chris was just using. But has anybody got other recommendations for work on fairy tales? And there's Bruno Bettelheim.
Well, yes, I mean, a very good book. If by fairy tales you mean in the rather conventional sense, like
European.
Sleeping Beauty, European fairy tales, Bruno Bettelheim's Symbolic Wounds is quite nice. But of course, the uses of enchantment is more explicitly on fairy tales. So Bettelheim is kind of quite good as a kind of Freudian with a little bit more idea of the sort of female input than perhaps Freud had. But I mean, if you want serious stuff, and Bettelheim in some ways isn't serious, I would suggest Peter Gow, An Amazonian Myth and Its History, Stephen Hugh Jones on the Barasana, and of course Denise will know a vast number of people from recent writers on mythology in South America. I don't know if Denise wants to come in and help out.
Well, there's a side to this that you don't talk about, Chris, and that's, you know, it was very unfashionable for a while to talk about diffusionism, but basically what you're saying is that from Africa, people dispersed outwards carrying these myths and rituals with them. I think it's not, you know, it's as if you've given us all the basic armory, and that, you know, that last comment by Manchego was like all the details about going into much more detailed analysis of those myths and rituals. And, you know, there was a whole debate in the 19th century between Durkheim, who used this word social or ritual as if it had meaning in and of itself, with Gabriel Tarde, who didn't want to do that. He wanted to analyze what the social was. You couldn't just say that. You had to analyze how it happened, how people actually did these social interactions individually or collectively. And Lévi-Strauss, in a way, is taking that up, as does Bruno Latour today, reanalyzing what ritual or social or science or whatever how it comes about, how it happens collectively. You know, there are people like Wim van Binsbergen, who's a Dutch anthropologist, and he's drawing maps of this diffusion pattern of things out of Africa, like the flood myths, and where he finds it, and he's drawing maps of the world of this diffusion pattern. And it's as if much more work should be done on that. And maybe as a group, we probably have lots of that knowledge amongst us to share and maybe do that at some stage. But those are my thoughts.
Just very briefly, I mean, a very good point about Durkheim. The thing about Durkheim's social is it's, I don't know, you've no idea where it comes from. There's no agency. I mean, apparently the females separate themselves from the males. They bleed and repulse the males, as he puts it, and that gives you everything, really. It gives you the first sort of boundary, the first concepts, the first, you know, I mean, it gives you totemism. But it's as if somehow the blood itself is repulsive. There's no political agency, and critically with Durkheim, there's never any conflict. You don't get contradictions and conflicts. It's this horrible sort of super functionalism where just everything sort of harmonizes into some sort of block, and you have no idea why. So I couldn't agree more, which I think is why I was immediately persuaded by the Darwinian arguments about conflict and coalitions and all the stuff around Sarah Hrdy, in order to get to something like sociality that we humans understand. On diffusionism, I'm very well aware, but I can't follow it at all. I'm very well. It is astonishing how stories seem to migrate with the will of their own, almost like migratory birds, swallows or something. I mean, how the story of Cinderella arrived in Europe from China. Yes, those things are interesting, but my initial position is a very crude and simple one. It's just that we humans evolved in Africa with a very, very simple thing, which is just a thing which I call ritual, which is every month, at the minimum, women kind of rise up and establish that some things are sacred, and when each new generation comes around, the girls have to be incorporated into that coalition, which is what we call initiation, and it happens when a girl first menstruates. Now that migrates around the world simply because humans do, and then out of that source come the stories. But I'm very well aware it's immeasurably more complex than that, because of course humans came out of Africa, and then wherever they were and migrated and all that stuff, all the different trade routes and various things, of course stories can move around with a kind of mind of their own. And then there's all the stuff that Camilla's just mentioned. You can actually now do these, what do they call these sort of maps now, which can actually, you can do sort of family trees.
Phylogenetic
trees to map different ages. You can work out how old Jack-and-the-Beanstalk is in some sense. I can't possibly
potentially work out what were the original forms or variants of the stories, like what did they look like. But I would make an argument that it isn't necessarily diffusionism exactly. It's you're getting a you've got a model which replays the situation kind of again and again and again, and people are going to be producing highly similar metaphors, reformulated, that'll show a lot of similarity. I'm not sure that it means that there's one neighboring group telling another neighboring group, telling them all the way from China to Cornwalls. It's kind of coming out of a shared logic, I think, is a kind of unitary principle that bears a lot of resemblance and form. That's the way that I see it. But you could have both arguments going on as well. So I'm not hardcore about it. Yeah, but there's very nice points.
Does anyone want another little very short story it's from Oregon, Southern Oregon? It's called a Coos Indian version of the bird nester. Really quite short. I can do it if there's nobody else.
Go for it.
Well, Lévi-Strauss culminates his investigations by extracting what he calls the quintessential mythic formula from a Coos Indian Southern Oregon version. And as I'll read it out. Wanting to seduce his son's wives, an old man placed his blood-stained feces at the top of a small conifer tree and arranged for a red-feathered woodpecker to peck at them. Attracted by the red feathers, his son was tricked into climbing the tree, which was then made to rise magically higher and higher into the sky. The wicked old man changed his skin, assuming the appearance of a young man, and seduced his daughter-in-law. Meanwhile, marooned up in the sky, the young man copulated first with a sun woman, and she had to be approached with a penis made of ice, and then with two sisters. And these were nocturnal travelers. The elder, a nice, kind girl, explained that they had come from another country. Quote, "Whenever we get anywhere," she said, "the women have their monthly periods," close quotes. And now Lévi-Strauss just comments, "The women cause menstrual synchrony by moving to and fro from between one world and the next, each staying in each world for the same length of time." And I kind of agree with Lévi-Strauss. That is the quintessential mythic formula. But this, when I read this, I hope you can notice these things don't translate. I mean, all the mounds and mounds of theoretical work on Lévi-Strauss and his mythology, you won't get the blood-stained feces. I mean, the man's got piles or something to put blood on his ship. But I mean, you know, somehow so many things get lost in translation, and yet that is extremely significant. It's shit. It's got blood on it. That's kind of the best this old geezer can do to sort of produce something attractive. Of course, the red-feathered woodpecker makes it look quite nice, but the whole thing's a horrible trick. And of course, the boy who gets up there is very disappointed to find this blood-stained ship up there. Meanwhile, his dad's having sex with his own wife and so on. But there's a lot of disappointment, I think, in some of these patriarchal transformations that young men would have experienced. And a lot of slightly unpleasant, well, I would say very unpleasant trickery. The trickster is kind of funny, but some of these tricks aren't quite so funny. And then perhaps the only other thing to say is The Naked Man. The Naked Man is, of course, the title of the last volume. And the naked man is a man who's been stripped naked by his rival, who wants to copulate with his son's wife. And it's just this clothed, unclothed, raw, cooked, all these oppositions. Ultimately, they're the same rhythmic movement. But the trouble with Claude Lévi-Strauss's stuff, I mean, among some other problems, is that somehow he seems satisfied with the idea that you've got oppositions. And that's not very testable. I mean, yes, all myths have got oppositions. You've got raw and cooked, and high and low, and near and far, and all these different oppositions. But just to say that myths are full of oppositions is not specific enough. The theory that I've worked out in my thesis, I mean, it's bad because it sounds rather unlikely, but it's good because you should be able to shoot it down. You should be able to shoot my theory right down, because it makes all kinds of very unlikely, statistically unlikely predictions about what you should find in any myth and what you won't find. And it's it stood up. I mean, for example, you go to the other world and you need to be hungry. I mean, Of course, somebody can make up a story where dead people eat feasting the whole time and lots of very nice cooked meat, and they're having wine, beer, meat. The trouble is, if you do that and they're feasting on cooked meat, they're not dead. I'm talking about dead people. The dead people don't. If you're in the land of the dead and you want to get in your story the message clear, you don't have them eating cooked meat. Just as simple as that. So there's so many predictions I can make about what you will find and what you won't find, that it makes the theory falsifiable. The key test of a scientific theory is that you should be able to prove it's wrong. Why won't they do that? I mean, the trouble, what people did after Lévi-Strauss, they just gave up. They wandered off into other things, except for South America. And there, anthropologists have done wonders. But apart from that, and maybe a few other places, it's really disappointing how people have just sort of moved on from Lévi-Strauss. Instead of tightening up the theory, making it more concrete, more specific, more testable. And I think if we do that, you'll find actually it's amazing. Yes, the world's myths are one story, variations on a theme. It's astonishing.
Great. Have we nearly finished now? We're 20 past. There was a point in the chat about Chinese dragons, but I'm not sure we can start on that one right now. Do we want to start on that one right now? It's a big question.
Chinese dragons are dragons. They're male and female. I mean, and one of our students in Ragnar book club, Cassandra, is working very hard on Chinese dragons. But there's no question, Chinese dragons are weather changing, moon changing, synchronous, bleeding, fertile, amazing between monsters, which are also the source of all sovereignty and power. The Chinese emperor was the dragon-faced. Everything which Fraser says about menstruating maidens and divine kings applies absolutely to the Chinese divine emperors, the dragon-faced ones. And men can become dragons. I mean, you know, all you've got to do is do a bit of bleeding and make sure you don't let the sun shine on your head, and you make sure your feet aren't on the ground too often.
Okay.
Something about anti-Semitic and all various things going on here.
Ethnocentric imperialism for finding the same structures worldwide, except that they're coming from indigenous sources rather than imperialist sources. But
well,
that's another big question.
We became a human in a revolution, and it was the most anti-imperialist thing you could possibly have, and it still would be if we had a world revolution based on a women's uprising. I think can't quite see how it would be imperialist. But anyway, yeah.
Yeah, that's a big question we'll need to return to. Perhaps we can carry on with that question next week. Next week is Chris's final go at this grammar of world mythology with Plains Indian Arapaho story, The Wives of the Sun and Moon, which is a story from The Origin of Table Manners, third volume of Lévi-Strauss Mythologique. And we're going to run the Zoom platform, but we are also going to be in the class at UCL, our old home ground at UCL, for anybody who can make it there. We'd be very pleased to see you. Yeah. And Amy, thank you for putting up Heidi Gertner-Abendroth reference. Just to mention that Heidi Gertner-Abendroth is going to be talking to us on March the 8th. So she might have some answers there as well. Is that okay? Are we good for today? I think we're good for today.
Yeah. Just perhaps say, I mean, do come next week. It's going to be much more meticulous next week. Next week will be really focused on one story. And it's a beautiful, amazing, that story tells you more about the history of kinship and the origin of, you know, permanent marriage and how we got stuck.
History of kinship. Kin, K-I-N.
K-I-N ship. No kings in it at all. No. Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for your contributions.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks. That was a nice discussion. Thank you very much.
Next week.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.